Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the UMass Boston Community Meeting with Accordia partners regarding the Bay City development at the former Bayside site. My name is Matt Fenlon. I'm an assistant chancellor at UMass Boston, and I serve as the university's representative on the Community Advisory Committee for this project. A rundown of today's agenda so everybody is prepared for the timing and the presenters. We're going to start momentarily with some welcoming remarks from our Chancellor, Marcelo Suarez-Orozco. He will be followed by Aisling Kerr from the Boston Planning and Development Agency. And then we will hear from Dick Galvin and Kirk Sykes, the principals of Accordia Partners, who will give a presentation on the development, followed by an open question and answer session. And we wanted to reserve the majority of the time for folks to ask some questions. So you will notice on the bottom of your screen is the Q&A feature. During the presentation or after the presentation, as you have questions, please type them in. And once the presentation is concluded, we will get to as many as time allows. With that, now I'd like to kick it over to our Chancellor, Marcelo Suarez-Orozco.
Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon. My name is Marcelo Suarez-Orozco, and I am the Chancellor of the University of Massachusetts, Boston. I welcome everyone to this community meeting about the proposed development of the Bayside site. I want to start by thanking all students, faculty, and staff who are in attendance today. It is important that everyone have their voice heard during this process as we learn about the opportunities and challenges for UMass Boston moving forward in the context of this very important project. Indeed, my endeavors now and moving forward would focus on maximizing opportunities for our communities, above all our students, as well as research opportunities and possible partnerships for our faculty and staff. Safeguarding the harbor in this era of unchecked climate change is another real priority. Ecological, terrestrial, resilience are today urgent and timely concerns. Lastly, as Chancellor, it is my responsibility to protect the public good. I want to thank Dick Galvin, Kirk Sykes, and the entire Accordia team for agreeing immediately to join us for this presentation. They have been open and accessible to partnering with UMass Boston every step of the way and have a history of working with our students. In fact, I just met one of their employees, a former student of UMass Boston. I look forward to seeing their presentation and learning how the proposed development will benefit our campus as well as the challenges moving forward. I would also like to recognize and thank the Boston Planning and Development Agency for being with us today. BPDA is overseeing the development process, which includes hosting a series of public gatherings that I know many of us have been that are joining us today have taken part as well. You're going to hear shortly from the BPDA, but I think it is important to note that the formal process for moving forward has only just begun and is expected to last until the spring of 2022. Therefore, your input today and in the weeks and months ahead will help make this project better for our communities, better for our campus, better for the peninsula. I'd like to take a few minutes to briefly review some of the steps over the last few years, which obviously antecede my arrival as Chancellor. The processes and the steps that got us to where we are today. So Matt, our UMass Boston lead on these issues, will correct me if I get anything wrong. 10 years ago, approximately, the University of Massachusetts Building Authority purchased the Bayside site. Since that time, it has been a valuable part of our campus, but providing parking during periods of intense campus construction. In 2017, UMass Boston and the University of Massachusetts Building Authority began the process of gauging interest in the real estate market for development at the Bayside site. This included hiring an outside firm and forming an advisory group of experts with representatives from our UMass Boston campus, the Building Authority of the University of Massachusetts System, the President's Office, Board of Trustees, and the City of Boston. Due diligence was conducted over the course of 2017 and 2018, as 6 developers were interviewed before 2 finalists were selected for this endeavor. In 2019, the advisory group unanimously recommended Accordia partners to President Meehan, and the Board of Trustees subsequently voted to direct the University of Massachusetts Building Authority to negotiate a ground lease with Accordia. Later, in 2019, a lease agreement was reached for a cash transaction with Accordia, committing to pay the University of Massachusetts Boston a minimum of $192 million and a maximum of $235 million. In addition to having the best financial offer to UMass Boston, Accordia was selected, in part, I believe, because of their commitment to voluntarily go through the BPDA's Article 80 public process and their commitment to developing in the site of diversity, equity, and inclusion that is at the core of UMass Boston's mission. In fact, I believe Accordia is a certified minority business enterprise. Once the agreement was reached with the University of Massachusetts Building Authority, Accordia began holding a series of public community meetings to gather perspectives from our communities on our shared ambitions, dreams, and concerns for the development at the site. This process included multiple meetings with members of the UMass Boston community. This past September, Accordia filed its project notification form, which formally kicked off the BPDA development process. I began as your chancellor just before Accordia released the plans for this proposed development. So I, too, am listening and I'm learning, along with all of us, as how our students, our faculty, our staff will engage and benefit from said development. I have asked Accordia today to keep their presentation brief so that the bulk of our time can be spent in conversation, in questions and answers. I am happy to turn it over to the BPDA for a quick overview of the Article 80 process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chancellor, and thank you, Matt, for organizing this afternoon's discussion as well. My name is Ashlyn Kerr. I'm a project manager with the Boston Planning and Development Agency. I would preface everything this afternoon by saying as well that I am a lifetime resident of Dorchester. I've lived across the street from UMass Boston and substantially the Bayside site for my entire life. So very familiar with the area, very familiar with the UMass campus and the Bayside site as a whole. Nice to see a lot of familiar names on this afternoon's call as well. I know a lot of the UMass student and faculty and other populations have participated in one or several of the Article 80 meetings that we have hosted thus far in connection with Accordia's project notification form submission earlier this fall. As the Chancellor noted, and I'll try to keep my remarks brief as well to let the team get into their presentation and then the Q&A, we initiated this Article 80 process with a very thoughtful and deliberate schedule of public engagement. We have assembled a community advisory committee, which is a 27-person body. As you heard, Matt Fenlon does represent UMass Boston on that stakeholder group as well. A mixture of residents, Columbia Point stakeholders, professional affiliations, so architects, land use attorneys, things like that, civic representatives. We were very fortunate to have over 80 applicants for that advisory committee back in the summer when we initiated that process. And we're able to dig down and get a really good diverse group that represents every different corner of Dorchester and every different stakeholder that will be affected by this project, and will be a part of the process for the duration of the 10, 20 plus years of the build out and the future of Dorchester Bay City. So that's been a great group to work with. We've had one meeting so far. We will be re-engaging with that group as well as we continue through the process. And their purpose is specifically to advise the BPDA on matters of community benefits and mitigation. So the BPDA and how we use Article 80 review is we have a few different layers. The one we're looking at here with the Bay City project is large project review, which is anything over 50,000 square feet. Anything that meets that threshold initiates the formation of what we usually call an impact advisory group. Because this is such a big project and there's so much happening in the Morrissey Boulevard corridor, we wanted to pull together an advisory committee here. So the Morrissey Boulevard CAC that's reviewing Dorchester Bay City may also review other projects that come up on the Morrissey Boulevard corridor, or perhaps some state projects, things like that. So very good group. We look forward to continued engagement there. Going back to our public meeting schedule, we did a kickoff public meeting that was very well attended, and then we dove into some topic specific discussions. We looked at urban design, we looked at infrastructure and transportation this past week. Before that, we had talked about open space, public realm, and resiliency. And the next public meeting on December 2nd will focus on housing and economic development. So we are fully aware, as is the Accordia team, that this is a big project. There's a lot going on, there's a lot to discuss, and it would have been impossible to try to discuss everything in one meeting or a series of general meetings. So that's why we felt it was very important to, right off the bat, break this down into topic-specific meetings. We've tried to be pretty diligent about that too, just in order to make sure we're able to get valuable feedback out of every conversation. In the virtual world, we've been able to do things pretty well, right? Probably at 98% efficiency, but it can oftentimes be tough to really get valuable feedback, as I'm sure you're all finding too, right, in your virtual classes and other virtual engagements. Have meaningful conversation. So by sticking to that plan for, okay, we're here tonight to talk about this subject, really allows us to kind of make sure we're staying on track and progressing in a lot of different areas, all of equal importance. As I've said, for those of you who have joined us in any of the public meetings, the BPDA and the Accordia team are in the first of what will be at a minimum a two-step process of review here for the Bay City proposal. The submission of the project notification form kicked off an initial public comment period, which is still open through December 11th, and a series of public engagement and public meetings. We've also been doing a ton of internal review, stakeholder review with the state and different agencies that are involved on Morrissey Boulevard, Day Boulevard, and things like that. When we get through this first phase of review, we, the BPDA, will then compile all comments received, all feedback, and we'll put together what we call a scoping determination. That basically becomes a document that we issue to Dick and Kirk and their team and say, here you go, guys, here's feedback. Theoretically, that scoping determination should then shape how the project evolves in its next iteration, which will be filed in a draft project impact report. These are all public documents, so whenever they're issued, they will all be posted to the website too, on our bostonplans.org website, so everything's available there. So to echo what the Chancellor had said, I would stress that we are still in the early stages of what will be a multi-phased, multi-year process here, right? At BPDA level, but then also state level, MEPA review, things like that, ongoing review with UMass Boston. So very, very pleased to be here this afternoon for this kind of supplemental conversation to the Article 80 process. Dick and Kirk and their team have been a pleasure to work with from the city's perspective. I think we're very fortunate. I would note we see a lot of development teams, a lot of different projects in the city, and these are definitely one of the better teams we have the privilege of working with. So very responsive, very genuine. I hope you all find that today as well. And we've appreciated working with them and will continue to do so. So I'll stick on. I'm happy to answer any questions about our process, our review once we get there, but I'll hand it over to Dick and Kirk and their team.
Thank you, Aisling, very much for those kind remarks. Thank you, Chancellor, for that comprehensive introduction, and of course, Matt, for your help and throughout this process. I'm Dick Galvin, and on behalf of Kirk Sykes and our entire DBC team, we're thrilled to be here with you all. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Hear more about Dorchester Bay City, hear about our thinking regarding the project, and as has been stressed, begin engagement on a lot of the details of this as we go through these early rounds of discussion. So what we're going to do is go through some slides. I think several of you have probably seen these in the past because you participated in some of the public meetings. And we'll move through them reasonably quickly to the Chancellor's point. We want to save a lot of time for discussion and questions. But if you'll bear with us, we'll walk through these slides. And particularly for those who haven't seen the presentation, I think it'll be helpful. So Kevin, can you tee that up for us? I think it's exactly a year ago when we were on campus. And I'm sure several of you on the call were with us in the auditorium when we had an early introduction to both the team as to what we were thinking of. So what we'll do is we'll walk through this. Kirk and I will go back and forth. The agenda you've heard about in terms of the introductions from the Chancellor, from Aisling, and we'll go talk about ourselves and the project in overview. And then, as we said, hopefully a lot of good Q&A going forward. So Accordia, Kirk and I founded in 2014. It's a Boston-based, as the Chancellor said, minority business enterprise development company, which means it's primarily owned by Kirk. He and I are the two founders, but it is a minority-driven business. We've both been in the business in Boston for a long time, as you can see by this slide, and have done a lot of primarily complex urban placemaking projects with a real track record, we think, of driving diversity and inclusion. We formed this to really drive, as we said, the diversity and inclusion, but more importantly, to be intentional in our approach around these things. And that's kind of at the heart of Dorchester Bay City. Kirk, why don't you jump in here as well?
Yeah, Dick, thank you. We are very excited to be partnering with all of you and excited to be helping make this place. And to a large degree, we've spent most of our careers building community in various ways around Boston. And this is obviously the largest opportunity to create access and opportunity, not just to the water's edge, not just to a great place, but to jobs, to employment, to training, to housing, and to a whole robust strategy to use the site as a living laboratory for all of you as students. The only thing I'd say is that maybe some of you heard me say before, I'm the product of two teachers, a professor and a first grade teacher. I hope I got the best of both, but there's a lifelong commitment to learning on my part, and I know on Dick's part, and we look forward to engaging the UMass Boston community in that outcome.
The reason why it's important to reference the date, 2014, is because we formed the company and the idea and the strategy, well before it was even clear the UMass, the Bayside site was going to become available. And obviously when it became available, we were interested in pursuing it. Our game plan had already been formed, a few years before. In fact, we first met UMass Boston again in 2013 through the development of the D Street hotels over next to the convention center. Two large hotels, great project, although nobody's happy about owning hotels at the moment. But what we did is a couple of things. We deployed our jobs linkage directly to a company called Best Hospitality to help train workers. Best is a nonprofit. It's affiliated with Local 26. And this had never been done before, using linkage dollars to train workers for a specific real estate project. It was paid up front, a building permit, so that we could get those trainees ready when the hotels opened. And the pictures you see here are folks from those training classes who actually worked at the hotel. And it was a great result, and again, something that we want to replicate as we think about BBC.
And it's worth mentioning that linkage is the monies that are paid by a project to the city to create opportunities for the residents of Boston. And in this case, Dick and I both own hotels, and the hotel workers union is about 98% people of color. So the impact of transforming and training and allowing access is something that you can see has been a long-standing commitment from us. Go ahead, Dick.
The other big idea was to, in order to try to get more access for young people, young women of color and from the neighborhoods of Boston into the real estate industry, which has traditionally been, white and old males. We created, in partnership with UMass Boston, an internship program that focused during the summer, partnering with industry-leading firms for training and professional development and in getting paid. And we had 57 participants, all from UMass Boston, over 3 summers, paid for out of our own pockets to advance it. In that, then Kirk and I worked together to extend the program into what's called CREST, which is in partnership with NAIOP. I'm very proud of the fact that I received the Chancellor's Medal from UMass Boston in 2016 for those efforts. And the most important thing is the internship opportunities for a lot of young students turn into full-time employments, including, as we noted before, with us. So that relationship predated any of the Bayside conversations, and one that we were just thrilled to create.
So we didn't stop with expanding the CREST program to other institutions and more students and 20 more companies, but also realized that in order to have the next generation of people of color participate in the real estate industry, which has been notoriously exclusive of that participation, we had to reach down. And so in my role as chairman of Real Estate Executive Council, which is the predominant African-American real estate organization in the country, we launched a program to train high school students throughout the country in real estate. And that program has run at many schools, but last year ran at University of Miami, Cornell, and MIT. It's being expanded next year to include NYU, and we hope to be able to run one on this campus around this project, where we draft the best and brightest diverse kids around the country who may or may not know about the opportunity in real estate and expose them to a $3 trillion industry. So this project is important because it's a project that was done about 20 years ago. Some of you know it as being on the corner of Massachusetts Avenue in the South End. And it was in a empowerment zone. And as such, the job creation and opportunity was a real goal of our project. When we started, this site was originally a helipad, a baseball diamond, and an empty warehouse. It became a site with one of the first African-American general managers, a 90% diverse staff, and maybe more important to note is all diverse operators of the food and beverage.
Think you're on mute.
Out of the fact that we've worked to both. Oh, I'm
You're
sorry.
good. Very good.
I'm
you're good.
unmuted. Okay.
Yeah.
Boy, I tried everything. Sorry about that. We're very excited that we have a 20-year history of both training for creating opportunities for diverse companies. And I'm personally excited to be able to bring the 27th African-American owned hotel and the only one ever in New England to Boston. Many of you know Donna Habana, one of my favorite hangouts, but also an Asian restaurant, an African-American coffee purveyor, a Black-owned spa. So we've been able to maybe on this site bring more diverse operators and individuals to the retail space than possibly any other in Boston. So this project is one that I also have been working on for 20 years, and Dick and I are now doing the last component of it. And having partnered in our lifetime with a lot of community-based organizations and community development corporations, this one in particular on the left is with Galena Park CDC actually along Morton and Harvard Street, where we've produced 500 units of every variety of housing: affordable rental, affordable home ownership, elder affordable, and a K-12 campus. So very excited about having been able to do that, but also working in Chinatown with the Asian Community Development Corp in partnership to develop what was a former leftover site from the Big Dig. So the importance of these projects is to say, A, we have partnered successfully with local community organizations to great outcomes, both in affordability and empowerment, but also that we've taken abandoned state land, which was vacant before we got involved, and turned it into vital places. And then lastly, I launched one of the first socially responsible investing platforms in the Urban Strategy America Fund, focused on people, planet, and profit. So we know how to find that happy medium between measured outcomes and returns that are required for the capital that makes places happen. Dick? Oh, so I guess this is the last one for me on this series. So I had the good fortune to be one of the only Federal Reserve chairmen in the Federal Reserve System's 100 years who was a Black person. And in doing that, under my watch, we launched the Fed Color of Money report. And the importance of that was highlighting the vast wealth gaps that we have in our city. And that's a terrible thing to recognize, but it's an important thing to take note of, because it leads right into the opportunities at Dorchester Bay City to create chances for African American, Latinx, Asian businesses to be here, for people to be trained from the surrounding 78% diverse community that is Dorchester to close that wealth gap, and for them to be able to do it not only in the form of affordable housing, but jobs and businesses that allow a notorious wealth gap to begin to be closed.
So thank you for indulging us in those few slides. We wanted to share that with you because we do think it's important as we talk about our intentions for Dorchester Bay City and these outcomes, to know that we've been working on these kind of things for quite a while and sort of have it in our DNA, as Kirk said. So now we'll go through the project. You guys know Bayside. We referenced 2 Morrissey, which is the Santander building. We had an opportunity to purchase that right when we were designated in 2019. So we took that advantage and bought 2 Morrissey, and the project includes the permitting for 2 Morrissey. Santander is not going anywhere, and the 2 Morrissey site may be several years out and being developed, but it is part of the overall project, and that's an additional 14 acres on top of the 20 acres of Bayside.
And maybe this slide is, go ahead, Dick.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say this slide is really just to remind us what a lot of you know. Sometimes when we're presenting to the rest of Dorchester, they haven't been here or driven by it as frequently as you have. But in fact, the leaf blower guy showed up just in time to make a lot of noise. Sorry about that. It just talks about how much impervious surfaces we have on this site and how it's creating issues of runoff that we need to mitigate, and that we're going to be replacing this with 20 acres of open space. So what you see as asphalt now will not be asphalt or buildings for at least 20 of our 35 acres.
This slide talks about site constraints that we must deal with in terms of both obviously setbacks from the water, which you'll hear about in a minute, easements that are on the site, the Chapter 91 Commonwealth Tidelands Act, which governs development adjacent to tidelands, the FAA, which, as you guys know, this is in a flight path, so it's governed by FAA. So we have a variety of site constraints that we've been working with to create the site plans themselves. You can see here the heights that walk away from the water. And those constraints we think will actually be beneficial to the overall project, because it'll create a variety of different heights and buildings, which is obviously different from the seaport, which as you look at it, it's all the same height. The chancellor referenced the outreach that we had done early on, over a year ago now, starting. Many of you on this call attended the community charrettes just about a little over a year ago, October and November, over at the BTU building. And it's important to remind everybody, those charrettes were actually organized by the four main community groups that are closest to the project. So, and we were thrilled with them, thrilled with the attendance, and also the feedback we got relative to, as the chancellor referenced, some of the things that people really wanted to see, particularly as it relates to open space and access to the water. And this chart that says compiled, all those sticky notes, those of you that were in those meetings know that that helped us sort of create, the vision around the actual plan itself. So we learned a lot in those community charrettes. Again, this is a quick synopsis of the wide range of civic groups, city officials, state officials, other stakeholders that we've been meeting with and will continue to meet with as we go through this process. We are always available to have these kinds of meetings and make sure people get to know us and the project. Out of all of these meetings, these themes emerged. And I think, as I recall, I think we even talked about this a year ago in the auditorium. As you can see here, and I won't read them all. I think you guys can all see them on the screen, but I'll just read the top four, right? Diverse and inclusive development, which is obviously a big driver for us. Enable key infrastructure improvements. We'll talk about that. A broad-based housing price points and housing types, and a focus on resiliency. We all know that is almost to a crisis point over here on the peninsula, and a key part of what we're working on. And then right after that, innovative uses in technology and life science job creators and opportunities in UMass Boston collaborations. Again, we're very excited about the opportunities there. Again, on the overview, Kirk mentioned the 20 acres of open space. We are going to be seeking to achieve very high levels of LEED designations, both in terms of the master plan, LEED neighborhood development, as well as individual buildings, and a huge focus on sustainability and carbon reduction, also driven, through the BPDA process that we'll be working on. Infrastructure improvements. We're spending a huge amount of money on site to create new streets and bike lanes and pedestrian, and we'll be spending a fair amount of money on offsite improvements. We'll talk about that shortly. And really a big part of our role we see is to convene all stakeholders for more permanent solutions around the key moves on K Circle, Morrissey Boulevard, and UMass, JFK UMass Station. The chancellor mentioned up to 235 million to UMass Boston upon approvals. A huge number of construction jobs and permanent jobs. And Kirk will talk about this. What we see is a huge opportunity for investment in job training and scaling MWBE businesses, both here on the peninsula as well as in the neighborhoods. And then lastly, we're really excited about a comprehensive housing proposal that we'll speak in detail about on December 2nd, both for the 1,740 units on site and also off-site ownership and stabilization. So the overall program is 5.9 million square feet. Those of you that have seen the filings have seen this document before. As you can see, it's predominantly commercial development. Lab and office of almost 4.3 million square feet, 1,740 units of housing, and about 155,000 square feet of ground floor retail, civic space, community space, all to help activate and provide services to the project. The Bayside site is 3.5 million square feet. That's not changed since we made our bid, and that became public almost 2 years ago now. So that's been very consistent as we move this forward. Kirk, why don't you jump in here?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that, Dick. So one of the big ideas here was, how do we assure access to the water's edge? And we came up with this grand plan of the T to the C. And the connection between the two sites really is at that point where our center spine, called the boardwalk, and we'll talk about that in a minute, creates a pedestrian and bike-centric kind of pathway to the ocean, and with a wide open expanse at the end. Let's go to the next slide. There are a lot of influences, obviously, you know, what happens on that space with bikes and peds, where all of you will walk and come and be, is actually leveraging what's best about Dorchester, its diversity, and the opportunity to build partnerships, not only with businesses and organizations, but with all of you, and to make it desirable for you to be there. So we are seeking to make the whole site as porous, accessible. Nothing is obstructed. Nobody is prevented from going anywhere. Anyone can go any place, and we're hoping everyone will come, along with all their cultures that will make this place special. So in terms of this organization of the sites, one of the important ideas is to have what we call the fingers of green space that lead out to the water's edge. That center one I discussed, which is the boardwalk, the sort of main spine, where there'll be a fair amount of food and beverage and places to sit and eat and be, and open space and bike storage, etc. But also a number of other fingers that are view corridors and are open to the ocean, and also act as the sort of connection between Harbor Point and our site along that edge on the right. And then with the new development of Moakley Park, all 60 acres of open space, we're able to then introduce ways for people to come over along Carson Beach, along the walk, along the Harbor Walk, and right into the site from both directions. Let's go to the next slide. So we wanted to quickly discuss what's really driving us about the excitement of a 78% diverse Dorchester, and that is to create opportunities for diverse firms to partner. And part of that is in identifying the opportunity, and we've looked at the design, the development, the construction, the operation, and ultimately the tenants that will come to this site, and tried to quantify the spend that each of those will be required to make this place, and then match that up with the universe of men and women and minority and women business enterprises in the city of Dorchester and Boston, and to help capitalize those ventures in a partnership with Eastern Bank, Boston Foundation, and other organizations that will help us get people ready to participate. Let's go to the next one.
And Kirk, I want to mention quickly, you know, as of today, we have minority and women investors who are in the project with us. We have key minority and women-owned firms that are part of the design team already and part of the branding and marketing team. So, you know, we're not waiting until we get permits to do this. I mean, that's what the ramp is. We're doing it now.
Exactly. I mean, a lot of times why people are not included is people don't start early enough. And you can certainly assure that you won't find what you need when you need it if you wait long enough. So our goal is to take the period over the next year and a half while we're entitling this and get people ready and start getting them trained, give them the tools, give them the working capital and mentoring access that they need to participate. And then once we start building the project, those firms will participate. And while they're participating, we'll be identifying, locating, and mentoring and capitalizing the people from surrounding businesses that want to participate and be at Dorchester Bay City. Let's go to the next slide. So, Dick, do you want to talk to this, or should I? I mean, we have, go ahead.
Yeah, we'll both jump in. I mean, obviously, you know, partnering with the university, it makes so much sense to us on so many levels. We've already had this history of creating the internship program. Kirk mentioned before the notion of a living lab curriculum throughout the whole project lifecycle, where we can engage with student and faculty about, you know, how this process happens. in all facets, design, resiliency, engineering, et cetera. Particularly in resiliency and the kind of expertise that exists on campus here, we want to make sure we try to take advantage of. And then ultimately, connections to job creators and future tenants in life science. We think one of the key parts of our success in bringing companies to the peninsula is partnering with UMass Boston and its faculty and students in making those connections for those jobs. Because we know that these companies want a diverse, excited, qualified labor force, and it sits right here in the peninsula with you guys.
So we'll try to move kind of quickly through these slides. I know we want to get on to your questions, but we did want to reference that much of our thinking was grounded in the thinking that occurred before us in the Columbia Point Master Plan, which a lot of people in the community spent a lot of time on. And you can see a lot of similarities in terms of pathways, street systems, connectivity of the different grids and how we connect to the Harbor Walk. And that's shown here further in sort of a look at that green line being the Harbor Walk so that everybody can get here from UMass Boston and from Oakley Park and Carson Beach, but also that we recognize the street system has to get knitted together from both of the sites that are now kind of disassociated at 2 Morrissey and Bayside. And all of that has to work with Mount Vernon and Morrissey. Let's keep going. Dick, you want to keep going?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously, those that have been on the calls know that we continually refer to this project as a transit-oriented development. And obviously by transit, the first thought is commuter rail, the Red Line, MBTA buses, but we're also enhancing pedestrian and bike access, as Kurt just referenced. For us, one of the key aspects of commuter rail capacity is the new Red Line fleet. It's going to be completed in 2024. Signal upgrades to increase reliability, increase headways, with increasing headways, meaning reducing wait times, and an actual capacity growth. We know with the scale of this project, we need these key infrastructure moves to happen. And the good news is, it's underway on the Red Line. The key part about this slide is down in the lower right, vehicle trips average per hour. DBC, Dorchester Bay City, is about 1,500 average peak trips per hour. The Columbia Point Master Plan, going back 11 years, was projected to be 1,535. The reason why they're so similar is the site currently has capacity for 2,200 cars. And those who have history know how much traffic was generated through the various shows. Our project, when fully built out, will have 2,500 cars. We are focused on making this, and it's in line with the goals of Boston 2030, to be truly a multimodal, transit-oriented development. A big part of the connection for UMass Boston down to the T is Mount Vernon Street. As you guys know, there were conceptual plans done for a complete streets renovation introduced by the city in 2015, all the way from the T, going all the way up to University Drive, and had a multimodal street design and much better improvements to enhance under the underpass coming out of JFK Station, all the way up. So that's been kind of sitting there. Again, we see this as a great opportunity to relaunch those plans. So our strategy to enable key infrastructure fixes is, unlock support and funding for the infrastructure projects in the area through coordinated public-private partnerships. So we've been underway with detailed discussions with the City of Boston and the state agencies about these important projects. To that end, what we're committing to do is fund and design the construction of the Mount Vernon Complete Streets project that we just showed you. So we'll pay for that out of our pocket. We'll fund preliminary design work associated with the other projects out of our pocket to help position them as shovel ready. Because the last thing we want to do, and most government bureaucracies are afflicted with this, is kick the can down the road syndrome. And we want to do is push these things to get ready. There's a variety of programs that we can partner with the state on, most particularly iCube, which we think can activate about $50 million in a public-private partnership, again, to be aimed at these big moves. And then again, continue to coordinate with all stakeholders, including the federal government. You know, we do hold out the promise that there could be infrastructure money coming with the new administration. And as you can see here, it's going to take all shoulders to do this. Again, and this isn't just for our project, it's for a variety of projects that are on the peninsula, including the Beat, including Mary Ellen McCormick, including some of the other projects down on Dorchester Avenue and into South Boston. All of them will benefit from these major improvements for JFK, UMass Station, Morrissey, et cetera. And a big part of that is to help solve resiliency problems. So all of these stakeholders will be involved, obviously at the top being the CIC and the community, meaning you. Quickly, we'll just reference this because we're going to go over it in detail on December 2nd. You know, we have 740 units on site, and we will have a broad-based set of price points for the amount of affordables we have on site. But we're highly focused on aggressive strategies to provide new housing offsite, both in stabilization offsite. Our goal is to have the equivalent to at least 20% of the units be designated as affordable as it relates to on-site. It'll probably be more than that when you see our presentation on December 2nd. Resiliency is one of the key pieces we heard about, one of the key issues we know that faces Dorchester. We are working closely with the city of Boston on Moakley, with DCR. We're prepared to adopt the Climate Ready Dorchester strategies to help make these resiliency strategies come into play, both in terms of our site. You can see here how we've elevated our site in terms of the buildings themselves and have very targeted grading strategies off-site, where we will invest a significant amount of money to bring about resiliency solutions off our site as well as on our site. And this references, and Kirk talked a little bit about the open space strategies that we have, but this also speaks to the fact that those open space strategies also factor in the resiliency requirements necessary to make all this work, you know, for generations to come, in terms of the elevations that are needed and seamless connections to the DCR land, as you can see.
And I think this slide also shows that we're very sensitive to the fact that we are not encroaching on the natural environment, but actually increasing the amount of open space. So those little fingers that reach back between buildings A, B, and C basically are adding about 60% open space to the area that is currently at the water's edge now. So this is just a characterization of a number of the different plant materials and our desire to use indigenous materials and materials that are typically found in these kinds of environments. And that means that we're trying to be very thoughtful. And a number of the students that have attended the meetings have brought up points about entomology and ecology that, you know, we're very receptive to and want to hear more in the living lab concept about your thoughts. Next slide. So
I won't go, yeah, just briefly on stormwater management. Again, as Kirk said at the very beginning, these sites are 100%, you know, covered with building or asphalt and don't have a very good history of runoff management. We have a great opportunity to change that, capture 100% of the stormwater, keep it on site, and improve the quality of runoff overall. And I referenced before our strategies on carbon-free Boston, meeting the carbon neutrality 2050 goals that we will do. Obviously, there's all kinds of strategies, not just on the site development, but in buildings themselves, passive house, laminated and timber construction. All these things we're looking at so that we can have one of the most sustainable building projects in the history of Boston.
So want
that's a
to
lot
wrap, go ahead.
that we ran through. You know, Kirk, let's go back and forth, right?
Okay, you got it. You know, first and foremost, we recognize the community we're building in, which is Dorchester, which is overwhelmingly a diverse place that we want to celebrate and bring to this site. Dick?
Obviously, we know that enabling key infrastructure improvements, both with our own capital and with our ability to drive convening and strategies with the cities and state, you know, we need to do that to make this successful.
And then in housing, we know that we need to give a person a job. We need to give them a way to have a business. We also need to give them a place to live. This site, as you'll recall, is 75% office and life sciences. So we have 25% to work with on site that can include affordable rental. But even more important, perhaps, is the ability to unlock the potential for wealth creation for those diverse residents through off-site home ownership and other strategies.
Sea level rise is obviously a key component of the project, key component of the peninsula. We look forward to engaging with some of the environmental scientists that we met with early on, but we need to follow up with and really actively engage as we start to go forward in more levels of detail and use the kind of information and data that you guys have to help inform us, just as you've done with the city of Boston already.
So the last one, I think, you know, we've already talked about it, but we hope you'll come to Dorchester Bay by land, sea, or T. And perhaps maybe the last thing will be to use your vehicle in the future. I think that'll be the case, and we're designing for that now. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dick and Kirk, for that presentation. We will now move to the question and answer portion. A couple of questions have already come in, so keep them coming for folks who are watching. And we'll start with our first one. It came in from anonymous attendee, so we encourage folks to include their names so we can make sure that you're addressed properly to answer your question. But the first question I'm going to ask the BPDA folks to answer. It is, how is the CAC utilized in this process between the BPDA and Accordia partners regarding this project?
Thanks, Matt. Again, Aisling Kerr, the BPDA's project manager for the Dorchester Bay City Review. So the Community Advisory Committee, the Morrison Boulevard CAC, was set up based on the notion that not only is Dorchester Bay City itself a big proposal and large in scale, but also everything happening in the Morrison Boulevard corridor. There's a few other projects that we are looking at in preliminary stages as well. So the thought was that we needed a big group, a wide-reaching group who can advise the BPDA specifically on traditional matters that an impact advisory group would advise on. So those are community benefits mitigation measures, but also take a bigger look and have a good understanding of what this corridor functions as on a daily basis and what some of the challenges or opportunities may be with development projects like Bay City or any other projects that come behind this one. Going back to community benefits and mitigation, which are the primary roles of advisement for the CAC, going back to Mayor Menino, there's an executive order in the city which allows the formation of impact advisory groups for any project over 50,000 square feet. And that executive order is on the basis that inevitably, you know, these big development projects have impacts, good opportunities, good processes, but also some impacts. So IAGs are set up to advise the BPDA and advise the city on possible areas of benefits and mitigation. So for example, we're looking at a smaller project, say hypothetically, and it's right in an intersection that has a really tough light, or maybe there's no crosswalk. And a member of an IAG might say, hey, there's no crosswalk there. That's a really good opportunity for this project to contribute to the public realm. We have focused our benefits and mitigation conversations in recent years in a few different buckets: open space, public realm, resiliency, transportation, just to ensure a predictable and transparent process for all. That's really where we place the majority of our efforts in these discussions. So for projects such as this, a lot of good opportunity, a lot of good areas for collaboration on benefits and mitigation. I would note that given, again, the scale, the location of this site, it's no secret that there's a lot of transportation and infrastructure that will likely be part of this benefit mitigation package in connection with the Bay City project. You look at Morrissey Boulevard, Koschuki Circle, JFK, UMass Station. These are all state or other agency owned projects or sites or roadways that need a lot of support and a lot of help, not just for the users of Dorchester Bay City, but for the day-to-day users right now. So it's good opportunities, obviously, but there will be a lot for discussion here in a lot of different areas that will be worthy of contribution and support. So we look forward to engaging with the CAC, elected officials, and others as those conversations continue.
Thank you, Aisling. We've had a number of questions come in so far that are specific to housing. I would encourage folks to attend the December 2nd public meeting that the BPDA is sponsoring that is going to focus specifically on housing and economic development. One question came in about how folks can attend that meeting. That was an anonymous attendee. If whoever asked that question would like to include your name, I can make sure to get you a direct link. But what we can also do for university-wide is resend another reminder to folks about that meeting in the direct link to the BPDA site that has the information for December 2nd.
And Matt, perhaps, sorry to interrupt, Matt, but perhaps I'll just so anyone else is listening and has questions on that. If you go to the BPDA's website, bostonplans.org, top right corner, type in Dorchester Bay City. The first result will take you to the Bay City project webpage. That's where you can find all the scheduled meetings. If you click on those, that'll take you to the link to register. On that webpage, you can also find video recordings of every meeting that has already taken place, as well as a ton of project resources translated in 5-6 different languages. So all the information lives on that project webpage.
Thank you, Aisling. Next question from Richard Hung. What is your assessment of the impact of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic on Dorchester Bay City? Has the pandemic changed your thinking and design of the project in any way from a year ago? Dick and Kirk, I know a similar question came up on that one on Monday night's meeting. So do you guys want to answer that?
Sure.
Yeah, I'll start and then Kirk can jump in. Obviously, we're long-term investors. So I think many of us on this call are optimists to know that at some point COVID will be in our rearview mirror, at least as we hope so. But we're also realists, and we know that some things are permanently changed relative to how people occupy buildings, perhaps, and translate. One thing that we've observed is our site, because of its proximity to the water, to Moakley Park, to these open spaces, and the open space that we're programming, we think has a great opportunity to be one of the best locations in Boston in a post-COVID world for workers and residents who want to have access to those kinds of open spaces versus a dense downtown location. We also know that the life science community still needs to be in buildings. They still need to be surrounded by their equipment, by their lab space, et cetera, to do the research they need to do. And that will continue to be a demand driver. And lastly, there will be changes to design of the buildings. The designs will become, obviously more COVID, I don't want to say friendly, but you know what I mean. And I do think those changes will be coming. We just don't know quite yet what that'll mean. Kirk?
Yeah, I think you hit most of them. I guess we would say we are urbanists at heart. You're an urban institution. We take great confidence in the history of the city that we've been here through 4 pandemics per century for the last 4 centuries. And, we've managed to still want to be together in urban centers. And so we see ourselves as the alternative to running away to the suburbs. We don't want to do that. We don't think you want to do that. And we actually generally think that Boston will thrive and we will be the new epicenter because everybody will want the diverse place that they seek that doesn't exist yet.
I'll just, one last point, Matt, because we haven't mentioned, our longtime capital partner, Ares Management, who, they're a very large investor. They, like us, believe deeply in both the long-term success of Boston, but of this location. And I think fundamentally, all of us have that belief that, that this site in particular will do well.
Thank you, Dick and Kirk. Next question what is a rough timeline for when the work will be done? Process-wise, the BPDA folks, do you want to go through the timeline?
Sure. Yeah. So again, we're in the first phase of what will be at the very least a two-phase process of review. I anticipate on the schedule we're on right now, our next and final public meeting for this first phase will take place on December 2nd. We will likely then re-engage with the Community Advisory Committee for another meeting or series of meetings there. And then we will take some time, likely a couple months at least, to work through the comments, feedback, and issue that scoping determination, which then will dictate what Accordia Partners comes back with as an evolved project based on this first round of public review. Probably take a couple months for them to work on that as well. There'll be additional materials, studies requested, some technical stuff. So we envision at this point starting that second phase of public review, probably early spring, late spring in 2021. And then that will be another process on its own. That might run a little bit longer than this first process did, just because when you get to the second phase and some things become a little bit more concrete, there's obviously more room for discussion and engagement on some topics. So that's where we are right now.
And maybe Dick and I can talk a little bit about the duration of the project.
Yeah. The other thing I'll mention to supplement what Ashland said as well is we're now going through a process with the Boston Civic Design Commission, which will have a lot of input, further input into the design. So what we file again, after all this feedback, we'll probably change things with regard to the project, some of the design, et cetera. That's what this is all about, is to taking in that feedback.
Right. And that commission is geared towards the public realm, the experience that you'll have, and we'll look forward to their input and yours.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, all of that is the hope that we can be in a position, as the chancellor said in the very beginning, sometime, first, second quarter of 2022 to be in a position to get going. So still a long way.
Thank you, Dick and Kirk. Next question from Anita Miller. Can you discuss how this project will impact and coordinate with the plans for improving the Morrissey Boulevard traffic corridor?
So as I referenced earlier, we're in these conversations with city and state agencies on looking at holistically, let's call it the three main components: Morrissey, K-Circle, and the station. Probably factor in Day Boulevard as well. I think it's fair to say those conversations will bring all those things together in a comprehensive study, we hope, sometime next year. And I think there's no doubt Morrissey is going to be a part of that.
Thank you, Dick. Next question from Jean-Ray Javier. What is the relationship of the Moakley Park redevelopment and Dorchester Bay City?
So I can do that one. The studies are independent, but the coordination is very connected. And so the city and basically the city, state, we, and all the constituents who've been weighing in on the studies that have been going on, and there was a presentation just 2 weeks ago, I believe, recognize that what happens there in terms of where playing fields are, where the running track is, how do you get across the street, how does Carson Beach interact with it, is all very central. I mean, one of the things that we are most excited about is being connected to the most continuous piece of the Boston Harbor Walk, and that continuous piece is connected to public transit in the most convenient way possible. So we see ourselves anchoring one end of that Harbor Walk, and along that Harbor Walk is basically Moakley Park. And we need to work on the connections to the park and beyond our site to the south. So we want you to be able to get from the campus to the park and stop along the way and get a bite to eat at Dorchester Bay City.
No, that's right. I mean, one of the things you'll see in our planning is we want it to be easy for UMass Boston students and faculty to traverse across our site right over to the beach into Moakley Park without having to go all the way around.
Thank you, guys. Next question from Lucy Lockwood. You mentioned transport by land and sea and T. What are your thoughts on ferry boat access? Thoughts on additional ferry water taxi stop in addition to Fallon Pier, which would be a long walk for some?
Yeah, well, we'd love it. There are some challenges in the draft and the dredging required to be able to get to the site. Even if we built a very, very, very long pier out into the water at low tide, it would be very hard to get any kind of significant vessel in close. That said, we're excited that there is a study going on for the pier down by the JFK Library. And, you know, we hope we can get maybe over time other unique types of vehicles. We've actually even looked at autonomous water vehicles that might be a possibility in the future. So we're thinking beyond 2020 and to 2100 and thinking about how we get here. Dick?
Yeah, I mean, we know the challenges of Fallon Pier. The studies are out there. But as developers, we're optimists. And as Kurt said, things like hovercraft, things that, you know, used to be prevalent that aren't so much so anymore, you know, we think could offer some exciting possibilities. And at this moment in time, we are not ruling out anything that provides different means of access to the site.
Right.
Next question is from Len Fishman. First, congratulations on an excellent recap. Phase 1 is projected to open Q4 2024. What is in phase 1 and what are you hoping will open in Q4 2024?
Great question. Phase 1 will most likely be a mix of life science lab and residential and ground floor retail and civic space with a pretty large amount of the in-place public realm and infrastructure to service not only those buildings, but the whole site. So we're working on that right now. We know we need to generally decide what phase 1 is going to be sometime early next year. But that is the idea, is we want to kick off with at least a couple of buildings to help underwrite all the infrastructure work that we're going to be doing offsite and on.
And I'll also add, Dick, that we're considering how we can activate the site over the whole duration of the build out. You know, sites that are not built on, we'll be thinking about how we can curate, program, fruit truck festivals, marketplaces, things where the community can start to be on the site long in advance of the full build out. And there will be a lot of opportunities to do that.
Our next question from Bianca Ortiz. There was a lot of mention about developing projects that have Black, brown businesses and restaurants. This project looks very expensive. My question is, were subsidized retail spaces offered in previous projects? Will there be subsidized retail spaces for local businesses for this project?
Right. Great question. In the earlier projects, there was participation by the city in the form of a ground lease, which in some ways helped the project make rents affordable. And we are thinking of very creative ways that we can let companies be here and grow here. And they range from writing down the cost of being in a space to concepts like food courts, where instead of 3,000 square feet to maintain, you only need to maintain 300. We're thinking of how companies can come from Fields Corner, Upham's Corner, Codman Square, and be here as an extension of their businesses. We're looking at supply chain and how we can reduce the operating costs and provide better quality product for people. If you buy 100 heads of lettuce, it's a lot cheaper than buying 2. So many ways to reduce the operating costs, which then increases the profit margin and survivability of businesses.
Yeah, the hotels that we referenced earlier have ground floor retail, a couple restaurants and a salon. They're all local. The rents, we discounted heavily because we wanted to activate those spaces. And you'll hear more about this when we talk about economic development, but there's no doubt we will be heavily discounting a good portion of the retail space to attract local businesses in minority and women-owned businesses.
Next question from Jasmine Walovich. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing anybody's name in this process. How do you predict non-student neighboring Dorchester residents would use the development? And how are you planning on making the development family friendly?
Great. Well, that's a great question. You remember that diagram with the fingers? Each of those fingers I mentioned being different. Some of them have a very residential character with play structures and places of quiet enjoyment. Some are meant to be active with places you can sit outside and enjoy a meal or be part of on your bike. And then some are places where there are dog runs, where there are places where people just come together and, meet kind of anecdotally or accidentally. So all of it is open to everyone. There are no cloistered, gated, restricted areas in the site. So if it's open space, it's open to everyone in Dorchester, regardless of age.
Right. Yeah, there's two basic strategies, right? One is how we build the public realm, as Kirk said, in terms of both active spaces and passive. And then the second is how we program the retail spaces that we just talked about, whether it's food service or other uses that'll bring people in and make it fun and make it family friendly. And then the third, which we're getting a lot more excited about, is art. How do we activate the entire site with art, and both from local artists and others, and make that a key aspect of bringing families in.
Next question from an anonymous attendee. How high are these buildings? Some of these look to be 20 stories high. They
are up, about 22 stories, I think, at the tallest. As we said earlier, we are capped by the FAA at about 350 feet. I think our tallest building is 325 feet at the moment, which is the building's closest to JFK Station. The buildings out by the water are about 100 feet. So they go from 100 feet to 150 to 180, et cetera, all the way up to just north of a couple, 22 stories. So yes.
And basically they conform to what's called the Chapter 91 cone, which is when you're building at the water's edge, there is a prescriptive slope that you can't infringe upon in order to maintain light and air. The other point is the site is also, you're never more than about 2 blocks to open space, water, or greenery, which we're very excited about because you always know you're in nature.
Next question. This one's for me to the moderator. Can you please remind us of your name? I am Matt Fenlon. That'll probably be the easiest question of the day. Next question from Ellen Fleming. Can you explain how UMass Boston students and faculty would be involved in a living lab? When will that start, or is it started already?
Well, we're in the beginning stages of a conversation with the school just to see how what we're doing matches up with your curriculum. Clearly, right now, we're tackling issues of sustainability, of resiliency, of engineering, of technology, how to make this the most forward-thinking 22nd century city that we can make it. And so finding out how that matches up with your curriculum is our first job. Then as we move down the road and have tenants occupying the site, we imagine that we will be going to those tenants and saying one of our greatest assets is access to a university that wants to train for the opportunities that may exist in tech, life science, other types of jobs, depending on who those occupiers are.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's as simple as we've got a great team of professionals, designers, finance, construction, the whole gamut, right? That we want to make available to the school and to the students, whether it's on-site or through Zooms initially or whatever, to create, potential curriculum that's Dorchester Bay City, right, from beginning to end, and how we can use what we're doing in the project to create an academic experience, and then ultimately a real life experience for students and faculty.
Thank you, guys. Next question from Cynthia Oriana. In the past, I have heard Dorchester Bay City described as a Kendall Square-esque project. As a resident born and raised in Cambridge, I have seen firsthand the impact of the Kendall development. Have you considered 1, a study of wider community impacts and impacts on housing, 2, affordability for local nonprofit, social service providers, and small businesses that typically cannot afford rental or lease space at developments like Kendall?
Absolutely. You hit on all the, first of all, I hope we're not Kendall Square. I hope we are a very unique place, from the architecture to the flavor, to the people, to who comes here, to the hours of use, to our proximity to open space, and natural attributes that don't exist in Kendall Square. So we're trying to nurture and celebrate all of those features in a way that Kendall couldn't even begin to do. But on your second point about how we engage not just immediate community-based organizations, but community-based organizations throughout Dorchester and Boston, we've already begun that outreach. And it's very important to us that while we are located on this eastern edge, that we are working closely with those close-in partners, as we have been for the last 3 years. But now we go further afield to the other parts of Dorchester and invite people in. Think about exporting training modules so we could begin to make it possible to learn about a job you might have in Opham's Corner, instead of having to take 2 buses and a train to get here to train for that job. So we're trying to reimagine a lot of things here, and we welcome your help doing that.
And just one other comment. One of the benefits of a large project is, versus in Kendall Square where there's a lot of single buildings, is we can set policies on ground floor retail, ground floor space for access for nonprofits, et cetera, that make it much more attainable and affordable, in terms of the overall scheme. That we couldn't do as just a single building, most likely. So, we plan to leverage that scale to make those benefits available.
Thank you. Next question from Domingo Altarejos. This project is right at the edge of the city of Boston and Dorchester. In the interest of community outreach and public safety awareness, what sort of security for the public and Boston residents in the area without having to rely on the City of Boston Police Department or the State Police of Massachusetts?
Sure. Well, I think security starts with good design. One of the first things we're thinking about is, what are the light levels? What are the view corridors? How does passive surveillance take place? What's the tree canopy so people feel comfortable walking down the street at 10 o'clock at night and aren't worried about what's around the corner? And so I don't think the best community policing happens because of police. I think it happens because it's been designed in a way that invites everybody to be engaged in making the place. And so we're trying to design that into the project. Dick?
Yeah, and it should be noted, even though the project is 100% privately funded, all of the streets, all of the parks, everything's open to the public, but all of it will be privately maintained. So, as Kirk said, it starts with design, but obviously we'll have, a security force. We'll have all the things that a project like this would normally have. So we're not putting any undue strain on the resources of the City of Boston or the State Police.
Thank you both. I see a number of questions are still coming in about housing. I just want to reinforce for folks that the BPDA process is a lengthy and intentional one. We're still just at the beginning of it, having started in September when Accordia formally filed this project notification. As Aisling had mentioned, there's a series of public meetings, some general, some topical. We've had specific public meetings through the BPDA on urban design, on resiliency and open space, on transportation infrastructure, and the housing and economic development meeting will be Tuesday, December 2nd at 6 p.m. We will make sure all folks are aware of how to participate in that meeting. But today we are not going to get out in front of the presentation that is scheduled on December 2nd as part of the BPDA public process. Our next question from Elizabeth Sweet. What strategies are being used to work with Harbor Point residents? I'd first like to just say that Harbor Point is represented on the CAC, and I know Harbor Point has been involved through their representative throughout this process. So Aisling, Dick, or Kirk, if you guys want to speak a little bit more to that, please feel free.
Well,
Sure.
yeah, I mean, we've,
Go ahead, Dick.
yeah, I'll just jump in. The Harbor Point Task Force was one of the original hosts of the community charrettes that we referenced. We've had a number of meetings with them. There'll be a lot more conversations, not only about the physical connectivity that is clear, given that we share a large border, but also some of the other things that we can participate with them on, programming, things within their community that we can be helpful on. So we're at the very beginning of that conversation, but clearly we recognize they are a very important stakeholder in this whole process.
Thank you.
And I would add to that too, Matt, as you pointed out, we do have 2 members of the Harbor Point Task Force, which actually not only serve as the kind of tenant representative body, but are also a co-owner of the Harbor Point Development Project. Corcoran Jennison co-owns the development with the task force. So we have 2 members, 2 leaders from that body, which serve in our CAC long-standing Harbor Point residents and citizens of the area. So very fortunate to have them involved as well. And we've been working very closely with them, as have Dick and Kirk and their team.
And as CAC members, these individuals meet with me and Aisling and other staff from the BPDA. And so, this is a conversation that's not only mediated by Accordia. Even given all their good work, it's something that Aisling and I work on directly with Harbor Point residents to make sure that their concerns are included. And, one thing that we talked about with them, just as an example, is, if Bay City is raising their site to prevent it from flooding in the future, what does that mean for people who live next to it? And how can we ensure easy access from people who live in Harbor Point to get up to these new public open spaces? And how can we make sure that these open spaces are accessible to people with disabilities, this sort of thing. So, there's conversations happening through the BPDA process. There's conversations happening directly between the BPDA and Harbor Point stakeholders. And then, as Dick and Kirk said, they're talking to them as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted. That was Ted Schwartzberg, who's a senior planner from the BPDA, and along with Aisling is instrumental in overseeing this process from the city's point of view here. Next question from Quinn Barber. There was a lot of discussion about increased bike and pedestrian access. Are there any plans to improve access from the Harbor Walk to the Neponset bike path to the south?
Well, I think first, we're trying to connect the site in all directions by bike. Every one of those streets is a state-of-the-art cycle track connection. All the fingers lead out to the Harbor Point, and then you can either go north or south. We have not been involved beyond the border of our site, but we will be coordinating with the Harbor Point and locally sides of that Harbor Walk to make sure it's a destination. So I think in a simple term, we haven't gotten as far south as beyond the southern tip of the campus, but we'll be interested to see how we can connect into it.
Thank you for that, Kirk. Question here from Jaylee Perea. Can you please explain the cash transaction and how that would benefit our campus, and how the $235 million would work to folks on the call? It has been mentioned that the $235 million would be based on the assumption that development will be completely developed. Would this be less if all these buildings were not completely built out as planned? I think that's a question UMass can answer, and I'll take a first stab at it. And I know Kathleen Perlice, our Vice Chancellor of Administration and Finance, is on as well. So Kathleen, if you want to jump in after I take a stab, please do. Jaylee, so the cash transaction is, and I know the Chancellor mentioned this and Dick and Kirk as well, it's a minimum of 192 million, a maximum of 235 million. And it is based on the square footage that will be developed. So the final number will not be known until the BPDA process goes through to know how much of the square footage will be developed. Kathleen,
I was just going to say, just to emphasize, the money will be in UMass's hands before, a shovel is in the ground. Let's put it that way.
Yes, so this is Kathleen. Thank everybody for attending this afternoon. As Dick just said, the payment to the university would come at the time the permits are issued by the city. So we would be looking to make decisions around the usage of that money as part of the campus's planning efforts that the Chancellor has spoken about earlier that we will be undertaking. We do expect some of the first funds to be used to support the SDQD project on campus, as well as pay off the existing debt that currently is on the Bayside property from its original purchase. So more to come on that as the project progresses.
Thank you, Kathleen. We're just running up at 2:30 here, so final question. I know there's a couple others in the chat, so we'll get to those that we don't get to answer live. We'll get to those folks individually. But the last question for this session from Gregory Zapata. The neighborhood thrives on its community pillars, including the Boys and Girls Club, the schools, and St. Christopher's Catholic Church. With the inevitable changes that DBC will bring, will your organization consider sponsoring projects that will ensure the community survives and has a place in the final DBC project, perhaps a community center?
So we've met with all the main stakeholders, at least the private ones. We've not really met with the public schools yet. And clearly it's important to the peninsula, it's important to us that those institutions do well and thrive. I know the Boys and Girls Club have plans for expansion on the peninsula. And we've, like I said, we've met with St. Christopher's as well. So there's a group called Point Partners, which is all the community stakeholders, institutional stakeholders, that has really gotten together for that very purpose, to make sure that we're all working together to advance the interests of everyone on the peninsula. And obviously this project, as being a large project, can help play a role, I think, in making that happen.
And I think some of the opportunities we talked about early on in education and in training are great ways to loop those institutions into the project. And we've done that before, where it's very easy to see how many of those kids going into real estate training in high school could come out of the Boys and Girls Club or might be referred by the school. And so we're very much looking to create that stickiness between the things that we can help happen and the institutions that already exist.
Thank you, Dick and Kirk. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I know, Chancellor, you're still on. I just want to give the opportunity to close remarks and thank everyone for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I want to thank everyone for participating, for engaging, for asking so many important questions with gusto and on point. I want to thank Dick, Kirk, Aislinn, Matt, and above all, I want to thank our students. Jaylee, wonderful questions. Thank you for your engagement. It is said that Harry Truman once noted, war is too important to leave it to the generals. Let me say that a project of this magnitude is so important that indeed multiple communities and stakeholders need to be muscularly engaged and need to be at the table in the conversations. I am grateful for this opportunity, and I look forward to further engagement as we begin this journey. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.